What's up, guys? So today I wanted to tackle a question that I get kind of a lot. A lot of people have been asking me lately, if I want to get into fighting games, do I need to buy a stick? And I'm going to try my best to answer that question today. If you don't want to watch the rest of the video, the short answer is just no, you don't need to buy one. But there are some reasons you might want to, and I'm going to talk about those today, as well as what are good sticks to buy, maybe what parts should you go with, should you mess with modding, that kind of nonsense. But right off the bat, let me just reiterate, no, you do not need to buy a stick. Obviously, some of the best players in the world play on a traditional controller or a pad. That's usually what it's called, a pad versus a stick. Like Sonic Fox plays on pad, like Knuckle Do, Snake Eyes, Fnatic, a really good Marvel player. Luffy plays on like a weird PS1 pad. There's lots of amazing pad players winning tournaments with all different kinds of controllers. So clearly it's not that big of an obstacle to not play on stick. And if you ask some people, pad actually offers some advantages over stick. For example, you can't hear the opponent's inputs very well, which matters a lot in live tournaments as well. Like pad is easier to carry around. You don't need like a big bag to put it in like you do with the giant stick. You can't see the opponent's inputs if you look at their hands like you can on stick. There are some minor advantages to pad as well. But there are some advantages to stick as well. I want to talk about just some of the reasons that I think are valid reasons to switch to stick if you're already a pad player. Again, I just want to reiterate that for 95% of players, switching to stick will not really offer a material advantage. Like, you're not really just going to be better when you switch to stick. And for most people, when you switch to stick, you really suck at it for like 6 months. I was terrible when I first switched to stick like 10 years ago. But in the long run, it's not really going to make you a better player. The only thing that's going to make you a better player is practicing. I think it's a common trap for new players that they feel that they've stopped improving or they're not improving at the rate they want to. So they think, okay, it's clearly a problem with the controller. But really the problem is just that like competitive games are hard and it takes a lot of practice. So don't think that switching to a different type of controller is instantly going to make you a better player, because it's not going to happen. It just doesn't work like that. Only the grind can do that for you. But there are some good reasons to switch. For some people, I think primarily the biggest one for me is definitely ergonomics. So if you're the type of person where you've suffered from wrist injuries or RSI or carpal tunnel or anything like that, generally I think pad is less ergonomic than stick. I don't think it's like a massive difference, but I know personally I've had problems where if I play on pad for really long periods of time, I really start to feel it, like in my wrists, in my thumbs, my hands going numb, all kinds of problems like that. Whereas with stick, it has the advantage that you're not carrying the weight of the controller and playing it at the same time, which I know like pads aren't that heavy, so this seems like a minor thing, but it really does make a difference in terms of ergonomics because your hands can just kind of float above the stick and not have to hold up the weight of it. It is much easier on your wrists and hands during long play sessions. So that's the first consideration I'd take into account, is that if you've had issues with RSI or that kind of thing on pad, switching to stick might be an improvement. You might also consider hitbox. I know, for example, Ultra David plays on a specific type of hitbox where it's angled out, which is more ergonomic for your hands than having them parallel. So it's just something to consider if this is a major factor for you. Pad might not be the option that you want to stick with. Another factor I would maybe keep in mind is what kind of games you're interested in playing. If you're only interested in new games, you're absolutely fine on pad. Like games made in like the last 10 years are usually really optimized for pad, and in the case of some games like Mortal Kombat, it actually is like designed for pad. It's kind of weird to play games like that on stick, but old games made before like 2008 or so, were generally designed for stick, and I think that some things are a little bit tougher to do on pad. Like, for sure, there's lots of amazing Street Fighter 2 players who play on pad. That's definitely a thing, but I do generally think that old games like this are easier on stick. There's a few techniques that you can do on stick, like pianoing is easier on stick, where you rub across all three buttons like that. Not really something that's easy to do on pad. It's a lot harder, and like getting mash moves can be easier on stick because you can use 2 fingers on one button or even more fingers than that. So there are some tricks and mechanics in old games that can make them easier on pad. And just generally, like, inputs are a lot harder in these old games. You have to be a lot more precise. So stuff like 360s was the Zangief, or like supers in Third Strike, or like a million different things in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. There's a lot of different things that require a degree of precision that is generally easier to hit on stick. But again, let me reiterate that there are amazing players for all these games on pad as well, so don't feel like you absolutely have to buy a stick if you want to play old games. But I do think that it can help with some games, and especially if you go to tournaments, real-life tournaments. A lot of these old games are still run on arcade hardware, which might mean that it's easier to just walk up and play on stick rather than having to worry about playing on whatever specific type of pad you use and hardware compatibility and all that stuff. So generally, old games, I think, a little bit easier on stick, but it's not the end of the world. It's just something to consider. And I guess the final reason I want to talk about is a little more intangible. It's kind of the community aspect. So first of all, do you play a lot of fighting games with friends in real life who play on stick? If so, it might be easier to learn sticks so that you can just pass the sticks around, not have to worry about everyone switching to their own preferred controller. This applies if you go to a lot of tournaments too. It's nice to be playing on the thing that most other people are playing on. So if you need to borrow a controller, or if there's like casuals and you just want to sit down and play on someone else's stick and not have to worry about always having your controller with you, that's something to consider, although pad does have the advantage of being easier to carry around, so that kind of weighs against the fact that, you know, stick is generally easier to share. There's less specificity across different types of sticks, but it's something to consider if you're the type of person who plays offline a lot. There's also just sort of like the self-expression slash modding slash tech component of sticks. A lot of people like building sticks or building hitboxes. People like modding, customizing, that kind of thing. If you're a hardware fanatic, I think sticks are really, really cool. I know I have a whole bunch of weird hardware lying around for all kinds of stuff. Like, I've got a racing wheel, and I've got, like, flight simulator sticks and stuff like that. So I definitely know, you know, collecting hardware can be fun. I have a lot of random hardware as well, and I have like a whole bunch of sticks. I have like 4 of them lying around my apartment. So if you're that type of person, you know, buying a stick can scratch that itch. But just consider, you know, it's not really something that will just make you better at the game. But if it's something that you're passionate about, it's something you can enjoy regardless. So those, I think, are the main reasons to buy a stick. Let me just recap. If you have ergonomic issues, if you go to a lot of offline tournaments or play with friends a lot offline, or if you only play like older games that are less accommodating to pad, those might be some reasons to switch. But again, I don't think that it's necessary for like 90% of players. So if you're trying to make the choice between like, okay, I have $200 for my gaming budget this year, am I really going to spend like 150 of it on a stick instead of just buying like a bunch of games? Definitely weigh that decision and think about how much use and enjoyment you'll actually get out of it, because sticks are pretty expensive. And to talk about that, I'm going to talk about what I think are maybe the best sticks in each price category. If you're looking to buy, these are the ones that I would go with. In the low-end category, the only stick I really recommend is the Canva Drone. I think this can be found for like $50 to $60, maybe even cheaper if you find a good deal. The Canva Drone is probably the best cheap stick on the market. It doesn't use Sanwa parts, which is why it's cheap. If you don't know, Sanwa parts are the same parts that are used in Japanese arcades. They're generally considered the highest quality parts. Most expensive sticks use Sanwa parts. The Canva Drone does not, but it is pretty easily moddable, so that's an upside. If one of the buttons breaks, you can just buy another button online for $4 and replace it, so that's really handy. That's what I would go with if you are on the low end of the budget. When you get to the mid-range, like $100 to $150, your options open up a lot. I think most sticks in this price range are good, so I would just read reviews and find what brands people are generally trusting. So like the Canva Crystal, the Canva Obsidian, which is what I have. This is an Obsidian. This is probably my favorite stick that I've ever used, but it is on the expensive side. There's also like the Hori Real Arcade Pro or H-Wrap. Those are really good for the price. The Razer Panthera is good for the price. These are generally like mid-range, good sticks. They almost all have Sanwa parts, I think, the ones that I named. So you can't really go wrong with these. They just don't quite have all the features that you might see from a high-end stick. And then finally, the high-end sticks, we're talking like $200 plus. Like the Kanba Dragon is a high-end stick. The Hori Vulix and Hayabusa sticks, as well as the Victrix Pro. I know these are kind of some of the most expensive sticks on the market, and I do think that these are great sticks from what I've played on them, testing them out at tournaments and stuff. These sticks seem great. It's just that, like, are they $100 better than like $100 to $150 stick? I think that's really arguable. You know, if you're like loaded or whatever, I guess go ahead. But I think for most people, that sweet spot is going to be like 100 to 150, maybe 180, depending on what you can find on sale. And let me just note that if you are thinking about buying a stick, it's usually best to wait until a big tournament is happening. There's almost always huge sales on sticks during tournaments, so keep an eye out. For example, EVO Online starts July 4th. That might be a good time to go for it. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to cover. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Let me know in the comments if you still have any questions about switching to stick, whether you think it's a good idea. Just to put a bow on it, I will say for most of you, don't worry about it. Just focus on improving on whatever controller you're more used to. But if you find yourself in a situation like one of the ones I described, or you just feel like upgrading to have some cool new hardware to mess with and you have the money to throw around, upgrading to stick can be a fun thing. I mean, I switched, like I said, like 10 years ago, and I've never really looked back. After I got over that adjustment period, I've really enjoyed playing stick all this time, even if it is kind of a pain to take on planes. That's another downside to maybe consider. But yeah, that's going to be it for the video, guys. Let me know if you found it informative or interesting, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.